Hi, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, or good night, depending on where you are. This is Guangying Liu. I'm based in Taiwan. I'm the managing editor of Commonwealth Magazine, and I'm also the editor of its English website. So I'm really happy and honored to be sitting with you today when we talk about understanding Taiwan. So, first of all, I would like to introduce our really distinguished panelists who are with us today. So, first of all, it's Guanting Chen, the CEO of Taiwan Next Gen Foundation, as well as Dr. Alice Yang. She is an assistant research fellow of the Institute for National Defense and Security Research in Taiwan. And also, we'll be joined by Professor Nikki Alsford. He's a professor in Asia Pacific Studies at the School of Humanities, Language, and Global Studies at the University of Central Lancashire in the UK. Hi. So first of all, I would like to open tonight's discussion with just a few background information of why it's time to talk about Taiwan and why it's important for us to understand Taiwan now. So if yes, okay. Right. So today's topic is understanding Taiwan. Next one, please. Yeah, so for people who have rarely heard of Taiwan before, maybe 2 or 3 years before, you would probably realize that a lot of people are talking about Taiwan now. And this is a screen grab from John Oliver last week tonight. He did a very accessible and actually pretty funny video to introduction of Taiwan. So it tells you what's going on with Taiwan, why Taiwan is really the hot topic right now. And also he talks about bubble tea and mascots. So that's really an interesting take. Next one, please. But for those of you who have been watching closely international relations, you will probably notice this cover story by The Economist from last May, when they called Taiwan the most dangerous place on earth. It's definitely referring to the geopolitical tensions with China and in the Pacific. So I'm sure our panelists will discuss more about that today. Next, please. Right, so actually Commonwealth Magazine did a great visualization story last year of why the Chinese military has increased activity near Taiwan. So my digital team, they took all the images of the fly routes of the PLA flights near Taiwan Strait. And actually they did in a very comprehensive study of the routes. And so much so, I was aware that the Defense Ministry of Taiwan, they actually wanted to use this in their dealings with our very close allies. So this is something that I really recommend that you check out. Next, please. So I would like to share with you, so people might think, oh yeah, Taiwan, it's a very dangerous place. So the people in Taiwan must be super worried. But these are some really interesting graphs that I'm going to share with you. So this is a cover story we did earlier this year, actually, just after the inauguration of President Biden. So we found out that 60% of people we have interviewed, Taiwanese people, they're not worried about war with China in short term. So I actually find this pretty worrying. So next, please. And over half of those surveyed trust that the U.S. could protect Taiwan. And so, yeah, they really believe that, the U.S. would intervene. And so I think this is something that's very interesting. Maybe our panelists can discuss later tonight. Next, please. But what's also really worthy of more attention is that actually you would think that a lot of people in Taiwan prefer independence. But actually, I think a very interesting trend that we're seeing from our past 2 decades of doing surveys. So we asked people, do you support the status quo, independence, or unification? You could see that unification, the percentage that support unification is really low. But people who prefer status quo, I would say that it's been at its highest point. But those who support independence for the past 2 years have been down. So that's also something interesting. Maybe some of you might be able to address later. The next one, please. Okay, so I think these would be very relevant questions that we maybe can address today. So, from our experience, Taiwan has never had so much attention in international media, so much spotlight on Taiwan. So my questions would include the following. So first of all would be, why are Western media outlets and pundits and politicians all of a sudden interested in Taiwan? Is this justified? And also I think people would be probably asking, how long could this interest last? And actually, I think a lot of people would also be curious to know, how worried should we all be about potential military conflicts across the Taiwan Strait? Also, sometimes I ask myself, why should the world care about Taiwan's fate, wherever you are? If you are not living in Taiwan, if you don't even live in Asia, what does Taiwan have to do with you? So I was hoping to discuss this with our panelists today. And also, if we have time, there's a very interesting question I would like to ask all of you. Is Taiwan really small at all? Because coming out of Taiwan, we always like to think, yeah, Taiwan is a small place. But I think many people would argue that actually Taiwan is not that small in a lot of respects. So, with that, I would like to welcome today's first panelists. It would be Professor Nikki Alsford. So, I talked with him yesterday and I found out that he actually has a lot of interest in Taiwan for very personal reasons. So I would like to invite Nikki to start, maybe first by telling us your experience with Taiwan. Why made you interested in Taiwan, and what would you like to say on the topic of understanding Taiwan? So please, the floor is yours, Nikki.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
For the lovely introduction. So yeah, I'll keep kind of my part brief. I just open with a short how and why I got interested in Taiwan. So as an undergraduate student in anthropology, I found Taiwan to be a fascinating case study in issues of displacement, particularly around the years of 1945 to around 1950, where we see this significant movements of two groups of people, a displacement of those people. So the Japanese out of Taiwan in 1945 and the Chinese nationalists coming in from roughly 1947 onwards. And this would have a profound effect upon the people within Taiwan that neither moved in nor moved out. And so my interests kind of followed and stemmed from that, and I moved to Taiwan in 2005 to take up my postgraduate studies there. And so my interests in Taiwan has remained constant since then. For the purpose of this kind of roundtable conversation, there's three kind of things I want us to think about. I want to start first with looking at what Taiwan is. So often many people ask the question, what is Taiwan, and I think in order to answer that question, we also have to consider what Taiwan isn't, right? And so there are what I think are three myths that need to first of all be discussed. First is the myth of the PRC, the People's Republic of China. So it's important that our listeners know that the PRC have never had any control over the island, whether or not that this is to do with their politics or their military. So I think this is the first myth that we need to deal with. The second is this myth that we see often get circulated, that Taiwan has been an inalienable part of China since ancient times. And I think this is that kind of second myth that we need to deal with. Taiwan is a product of settler colonialism. And in this way, we can put Taiwan in similar comparisons to places such as the United States, Canada, and Australia. And settlement to Taiwan really began from the 17th century onwards. And in similar context to places like the US, Australia, and Canada, there is issues of assimilation and eradication of indigenous First Nations populations. We see the same thing play out in Taiwan with the Taiwan indigenous peoples. So the similarities also rest in what is known in the United States as manifest destiny. And I think this is something in which that we do see to some extent being played out in Taiwan since the 17th century. We see special kind of virtues, particularly within belief institutions being instigated mainly on the plain Aboriginal people that live on Taiwan's west coast. The third myth that I think needs to kind of be dealt with to begin with is the myth of the Manchus. So the Manchus were the last imperial government to have control over China. It is important to note that the Manchus ethnically are not Chinese. And their first kind of a former colonial government that we saw Taiwan was the colonial government on the Manchus, which began around 1683. And it's important to note that what we had here was China being a colony of the Manchus, and Taiwan being a colony of the Manchus. Both were governed differently. They weren't necessarily governed the same. And we see this with other European style of colonialism. We saw this with the case of Japan. The way Japan colonized Taiwan was vastly different to the way in which it colonized Korea, for example. The problem with these myths do tend to lie within formations of modern nationalisms and the beginnings of the buildings of nation states. And so one of the key things that we need to see here is this product of continuity, a need to find a point in the past with an uninterrupted point to the present. And Chinese nationalism, both within the Chinese Nationalist Party that moved to Taiwan in 1945 and within the current People's Republic of China, has looked towards that sense of continuity. However, when China itself became modern in the modern sense of nation state buildings, and we see this in 1911 with the Xinhai Revolution, Taiwan at that time was becoming part of Japan, and so wasn't necessarily in those early conversations of being part of what it means to be a modern China. Taiwan as part of Japan during this period where we do see post-colonial movements or movements to removing colonial powers, the elites in Taiwan sought their own forms of self-determinations, but this would be self-determinations over the Japanese. And both Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, writing both within China, were expressing desires for an independent Formosa. We see this in and around the 1920s. So this argument that Taiwan has been an inalienable part of China since ancient times is in fact a historical myth. And I think we always need to kind of situate that in its first context. The second part that I think would be good and useful for our listeners is open up this case, a unique case of recognition, and who recognizes Taiwan. So Taiwan has full diplomacies with 13 out of the 193 member states. This also includes the Holy See and the Vatican. This said, Taiwan has relations with 58 UN member states. We see it have relations with territories such as Guam, Macau, and Hong Kong, and it has relations with a formal bloc of the EU. So it's not that Taiwan exists without any forms of recognition. And although it might sound counterintuitive, a complete loss of diplomatic recognition might not necessarily be a bad thing for Taiwan. It could be an opportunity to ignite what would ignite a constitutional crisis, but could be an opportunity to put this idea of the Republic of China to bed. And this is something I'm happy to talk about later if need be. It is here that I think this conversation over status quo comes in. And I think it is really quite important because Taiwan functions as an independent state in all intents and purposes. The people have their own passport. That passport it has degrees of strength in areas of which the Chinese passport doesn't have. It has its own military, it has its own currency. People pay taxes not to Beijing but to Taipei. And so for all intents and purposes, the people in Taiwan live independently. So Taiwan is a nation, but perhaps there is contestation about whether it is a state. And I think this plays into this kind of statistic that we saw in the graph that Guanyin just showed on the position of status quo. So for many people, Taiwan as being an independent country is a desired outcome. The status quo fulfills that desired outcome. And so the idea of moving towards any form of official interpretations of independence could in fact ignite conflict with China. And so people have a tendency to shift between those kinds of narratives. But if we were to put status quo, i.e. to be independent in existing circumstances, or to be independent in a more of a formal UN recognized context, then we could in sense argue that those two sets of data are essentially arguing from the same perspective. The third, I'm kind of very conscious of the time, but the third and perhaps final point I want to look at is towards this notion of future proofing, what Taiwan can do. And I was very interested with the statistic that showed Taiwanese perception towards conflict, and I think this links very much to a Taiwanese concept of risk. And what we see is that we see people adjusting their behavior depending upon those levels of risk. And I think for the most part, Taiwanese people haven't necessarily seen this as risk. And if we were to do a simple Google search of Taiwan and look at the images, in the past, those images tended to focus on the mountains, the east coast of Taiwan. More often than not were the different directions of the pictures of Taipei 101. I would say that within the past month or so that we are starting to see changes in the types of images showing up and more in terms of its conflict. So if we were to do a similar Google search of North Korea, for example, we pretty much don't see pictures of people, but what we do see is pictures of the Kim family or its weapon testing, and they tend to be the images. So I think in many ways this concept of risk in the Taiwanese context is essentially people are adjusting in order to this perceived level of risk. In terms of proofing for the future for Taiwan, Taiwan has seen significant shifts away from ethnic forms of nationalism, which tends to focus the types of nationalisms that we see in neighboring countries such as Korea and Japan, and of course China. And we're seeing more of a shift towards its civic nationalism. And I think there is a tendency to be a paradox in Taiwan in terms of its progressive politics. We've seen Taiwan shift towards the opening of same-sex marriage would be seen as being a great success in terms of progressive politics. But we do see that Taiwan can be quite conservative on certain issues, and I would say immigration is one of them. And I will talk a little bit about that in a moment. I do think Taiwan can be celebrated for a number of its successes. I think the first is the success that it had in the last general election, whereby it had overcome this sort of interference in the elections that perhaps other democratic countries have in the past been unable to shift, particularly the spread of misinformation. I think this was a great success for Taiwan. And I would say how Taiwan managed COVID should be seen as one of its great successes. And I think that promotion of what Taiwan and how Taiwan can help is definitely a model for the future. I do think an area on which Taiwan could improve on would be with regards to its refugee policy. At present, Taiwan doesn't have one. And it is a factor within, namely within Taiwan civil society, that there is a reluctance to have one, is because they can't simply pick and choose who can come in with changes to that refugee policy. But I do think that this is an area of potential future improvement, particularly if we start looking at future climate displaced people, particularly among many of those diplomatic partners that we spoke about earlier in the Pacific. We could see that Taiwan could become a location for the relocation of climate displaced people in the future. So I think that notion of Taiwan can help model can shift into other areas. So I'm going to kind of stop here. I am aware that Guanyin has some questions that she proposed at the front, and I don't know whether or not that she wants kind of me to address any of those, and if so, I'm happy to answer those. But anyway, thank you for listening to my old ramblings.
Well, thank you, Nikki. That was very interesting. And we know that you come from a anthropology background, so it was really fascinating when you mentioned the ethnic diversity. I maybe when we have time, I would like to come that affect how Taiwan people view their identity, how they form their identity. This is something that I would like to come back later when we, if we have time.
Oh,
But
yeah.
now I would like to give the stage to Dr. Alice Young. I believe she's coming from a legal background, and she is with a very prominent think tank about national defense. So I'm going to give the floor to Alice to share with us, maybe from a legal point of view, what Taiwan is and where Taiwan is going. But before that, could you also maybe say a few words about this think tank that you're working with? What does it do, and what's your job there? Thank you, Alice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alice. I hope you can hear me clearly. And so uh, I want to thank Nikki too, because he actually addressed some of the issues I would like to talk about. I have a PhD in international law, and I'm currently working for a think tank that is directly under the Ministry of Defense. But of course, what I said today does not represent in any way of my company or of the ministry. Um, as a lawyer, I would like to say something from the legal point of view, which might not uh, might not be that favorable to Taiwan. So, um, as what Nikki has described, basically Taiwan is a de facto state, and we have all the criteria that to be a fit to be a state. We have Taiwan has the people, the government, territory, and the capability of entering a relationship with other states. And we are also recognized by some countries, but sadly, maybe not so many compared to some other, which might be called not normal states, for example, like Kosovo, Palestinian, and yeah. But so the issue is, although we do have our own passport and we are a state, but legally at this in the eye of international law, there is some problems, and that also reflect to many most countries in their official statement about Taiwan. That is this one China policy. So although we do have trades or foreign relationship with other states, but when it comes to the law, de jure part, it is actually very difficult to say we are totally separate from China. And that also goes back to the slides of the beginning of people preferring status quo or independence. I would personally say maybe status quo for now is the best way because in terms of how things are going now. But maybe the ultimate role we will at some point maybe go to independence legally. So then I would like to address another issue about, for example, how the PRC, their military is, what they're doing, like, for example, how they are sending a lot of military aircrafts that is closer to Taiwan's airspace, or what they're doing in South China Sea or Taiwan Strait. A lot of things China is doing actually, it's of course related to Taiwan, but maybe not necessarily direct to Taiwan. It's more about the relationship changing between the United States, or maybe we should say broadly the Western countries, but mainly United States and China. And Taiwan then happened to become a key player and main actor in this dynamic. So I also personally don't think there will be Taiwan. China will attack Taiwan, or there will be a war very soon, especially because of the situation in Ukraine and Russia. And many people are quite afraid, and they actually feel this dynamic also, this Russia attacking or crimes of aggression against Ukraine. And then Taiwan and China will be next. But I actually think maybe it's the other way around, because there's a lot of support for Ukraine, and Russia wasn't able to win, at least not very soon. Maybe they will not win at all. I cannot say for sure. That may actually makes China think twice, or maybe it will want to do something else than actually attacking another country. But still, by saying that, because legally there's this one China policy of most states, and also international law, Taiwan is not necessarily a different country than China, since our official name is still Republic of China. For example, the international law, like Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, the right to self-defense, you can only use it when you are defending yourself from armed attack from another state. But if Taiwan and China is still one country in the eyes of the law, then that will be a problem if we can invoke it or not. But legally, there's still a lot of room for interpretation. And yeah, I would actually like to have some more discussions with everyone after all the presentations are done. So I think I will just stop here, because if I keep going to law, it might be slightly boring for everyone. And yeah, so thank you, and talk to you later.
Oh, thank you, Alice. I actually believe that Alice has been able to answer some of our audience's question already. I think people are really concerned about possible conflicts in the future, and they're also very curious about how the war in Ukraine has really making the situation more dynamic, and honestly, more and more people all over the world worried about Taiwan. So I'm just, I realized that Alice's connection was not very good. So I'm just asking her if there's any way to improve it. We could actually hear you, but it's been breaking up from time to time. I don't know if it's just me. So we will come back to Alice later, and I actually will have more questions about the legal status of Taiwan and the status quo. So we'll come back to that later. But I'm going to introduce our third panelist. That's Guanting Chen. He's a good friend of mine. He is the CEO of a local think tank. It's called Taiwan Next Gen Foundation. So I will give the floor to Guanting. And to start, could you also introduce a little bit about your organization? So please, the stage is yours, Guanting.
Thank you very much, Chief Editor Liu. Um, my name is Quantin, and I'm CEO of Taiwan Action Foundation. It's a think tank located in Taipei and southern part of Taiwan, Chiayi. We are a public policy think tank, and we provide suggestions, opinions to the government and other related organizations as well. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. It's a great honor. Today, understanding Taiwan is actually a very big topic. In order to understand Taiwan, you need to You need to have an overview of Taiwan's economy, Taiwan's geopolitical status, and more. So I would like to give an overview of Taiwan uh, to the people who actually did not have solely historic or international backgrounds on the island. So Taiwan has been here for around the world for the past has been rising in the international spotlight in the past decades. But it is until this recent, 2-3 years, that the foreigners or the foreign scholars started to put more attentions on Taiwan. There are many reasons behind that. What first, U.S.-China's competition, then the COVID-19. Taiwan has been dealing with the COVID situation quite successfully at the early stage. And then we also played a very important role during the COVID. We provide public health uh, um, necessary equipments to the war without any conditions. So as a contributor to the war, as an important economic and political entity in the world, I want to give you some numbers. So in democracy, Taiwan is ranked eighth globally and first in Asia in the EIU 2021 Democracy Index. And also to give you some perspective of Taiwan's trade power, Taiwan is ranked 60th globally. So it has more than 446 billion in exports and around 381 billion dollars in imports. So it's to answer Chief Editor Liu her first presentation when her remarks. It's quite big in a way. It's not that small. It's a middle power in many perspectives. And also for the global economic importance, Taiwan finds itself in increasing connected and valuable position in the world economy due to its dominance in ICT, information and communication technologies, which we would which many people will mention about our semiconductors. Of course, it's a very important part of Taiwan's industry, but it's not all of it. Yet, it played a crucial part during in 21st century. Basically, your computers, your automobiles, everything, they need chips. And Taiwan's TSMC is holding a massive 83% of the market share in that respect. So economically and technologically, Taiwan is leading the way in advanced chip technology fabrication. So to give you a better perspective, not just making chips, the chips that are below 10 nanometers to 5 nanometers, Taiwan actually dominate, providing more than 80% of this high-tech chip. So, more than that, I would like to mention a little bit about Taiwan and United States, since chief editor during his her remarks at the very beginning, like why does it matter? So, if you are from the United States, um, you, you probably would like to know more on Taiwan and U.S. relationships. So, Taiwan as one of U.S. supporters, or U.S. as one of Taiwan's other supporters, there are some principle of rule of engagements in a way. So the United States follow its one China policy, but please note that this is not one China principle from China; it's their own policy. So they acknowledges they does not accept the PRC's position that Taiwan is part of China. So they acknowledge PRC's statement, but they oppose unilateral change from both sides. Um, Also opposes, well, Taiwan's independence in a way. Um, United States backs peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences. So this is the fundamental rule of engagement on U.S. One China policy. I mean the U.S. One China policy. So it's very important to know U.S. stance on Taiwan. But is this One China policy going to evolve in the next decade or in the next few years? We don't know yet. But this has been a very important um, rule of engagement for the past few decades. And another important U.S. policy on Taiwan will be U.S.-Taiwan relations, built on the Taiwan Relation 8 in 1979 and the Six Assurances, which is in 1982. So you will be, if you are interested in Taiwan's politics, in Taiwan's foreign relations, especially if you are interested in U.S. and Taiwan's relationship, you probably will hear this Taiwan Relation 8, the Six Assurance, many, many times. So I would suggest for those who want to understand Taiwan, who wants to know more about Taiwan's politics, definitely read these two act or memos. Um, and for U.S. and Taiwan's trade, Taiwan is the United States' ninth largest trading partner. So considering a country that is, um, you know, not that geographically not as big, it does have a tremendous economic power in a way. And Taiwan and China, which I think it was mentioned by professors. So I will not go into this again. And Taiwan's political status in the world, 13. Well, last time I counted it was 14, but I think it's um, 14 to 13 countries have full diplomatic ties with Taiwan and no ties with PRC China. So the number was 22 just a few years ago. So you can see China is trying to undermine Taiwan's diplomatic ties with countries located in Central or South America or Asia Pacific island nations, or our allies in Africa. So as PRC rises, as its interest rises in Africa, we also lost several diplomatic partners in Africa as well. So I'm not going to details on this, since professor has already mentioned earlier in the forum, and I would like to discuss about the change of this kind of diplomatic ties um, in discussions. So, and the most of, I think this one more thing that I would like um, our audience knows is the modern threats on cyber battlefield. So, as we all know, China has capability and it has it well to undermine its potential opponent, um, it could be Taiwan, it could be United States, focusing on attacking critical infrastructures. And this poses great threats to Taiwan and also our allies in Indo-Pacific region. So this is a great threat that would need partnership. It's totally a common interest for all of like-valued, like-minded countries. So I would like to leave my presentation here, but I would definitely like to address these issues during these discussions.
Well, thank you very much, Guanting, for the comprehensive remarks. So, since Guanting mentioned something about the Taiwan Relations Act, I would like to bring people's attention to um, actually, people might have noticed that US President Biden were known for his gaffe, saying that yes, US will come to Taiwan's protection when God forbid, conflict happen, and his White House staff always needed to correct him. They would always, refer people to the Taiwan Relations Act and seek assurances and saying that our policies remain the same, nothing is changed. And fun fact: so President Biden was actually one of the key people who drafted Taiwan Relations Act. So that's in the history books. So we're actually we still have maybe 20 minutes to take questions, and I have noticed that there are many questions coming in. So in fact, some member of the audience has submitted earlier a video question. So if we could listen to the question now, and we could take that from here. So please play the.
There is scare of Taiwan being invaded by China. Am I right to think so? If that's There is scare of Taiwan being invaded by China. Am I right to think so? If that's the case with Ukraine still going on, is it World War III?
Okay, so I hear World War III. I would like Professor Nikki to answer the question. So actually, more than one or two. So there are actually several questions in this nature. So what's Taiwan's answer to China's aggression at the moment? And also, there's a question from Jasmine Brown. How has Russia's invasion of Ukraine affected the likelihood of China invading Taiwan? So, Nikki, if you would like to respond to the question.
Okay, so so I'll make kind of an attempt to address these questions on kind of what essentially is Taiwan's answer to China's aggression, and also what can be learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I'll do my best to kind of address those. I think obviously the responsibility of China's aggression doesn't rest with Taiwan. Taiwan's not the answer to China's aggression. China itself is the answer to its own aggression. But I think the key thing is that Taiwan needs to continue doing what it's doing, right? And that is to emphasize on the importance of Taiwan and the Taiwanese people, right? So at the moment in time, well, we are, like I mentioned in my talk, we're getting this kind of starting to get this shift of this Google image search. And I always find that that's always a good way of having a reflection on kind of how we see, or how media sees a particular place. So like, for example, I use the case of North Korea. If you do a simple Google search of North Korea, look at the images that we can start to predict the kinds of images. With Taiwan, it was always about people, right? So it was, if you did a Google image search, it tends to have about people, or the geography and stuff like that. It really didn't have images of military. This is changing. And so what I think Taiwan needs to do is to keep pushing and promoting what it does best. And what it does best is its own kind of, if we can use Joseph No's concept of soft power, is to keep using the ideas of democracy, democratization. It's the civic nationalisms, it's promotions of, So when it was around Pride, images of Taiwan came through. Taiwan's got an exceptional position because although it's not a UN member state, and by definition, and I think Alice picked up on it doesn't have to adhere to UN laws. It does do so in many ways, right? So it's a responsible power, and I think the continuation of being a responsible power in the international system is what Taiwan needs to continue doing. And I think that the spill-on effects will be that it will start to counter China's aggression. It's got the right attention. So I think without trying to kind of, give clues and hints to Beijing, one of the key things I think where Beijing made a mistake was the way in which that they worked with foreign presses. So when we start looking at a number of the global presses now have moved offices to Taipei, and as a result of that move to Taipei, we're not having to see a particular style of story. Actually, there are more human stories on Taiwan that are being produced as a result of AP or Reuters or Guardian or whoever have made that shift to opening offices in Taipei has actually had a benefit to Taiwan. So I think Taiwan needs to continue doing what it's doing. The Russian invasion of Ukraine and how it affects the likelihood of China invading Taiwan, I think a lot of that was picked up by Alice. I think the manner in which the world has responded to the Russian invasion of Ukraine would have put a question mark on China, on its capability, so to speak, particularly within regards to a response. Also, they're not the same, and we need to constantly remind ourselves Taiwan is not Ukraine and China is not Russia, right? And I think that needs to be reminded. I think it's easy to make the comparison between the two, but they're not in many ways comparable. And I think this is an important thing when we start to try to understand Taiwan, is to understand Taiwan for Taiwan, not to understand Taiwan in a context of a conflict. I think this would be probably the easiest way to kind of finish my answer.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Nikki. I do believe a lot of people are very worried, but like you said, so your point, I think, has also been echoed by Alice. So China would maybe think twice before they do anything. Well, the next question would be for Guanting. So we do have questions about companies because I think Guanting, you mentioned Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing prowess and how TSMC is a very important company. So many people, including my publication, actually, they talked about Taiwan having a silicon shield. So because of our really important semiconductor manufacturing business, that it's playing such an important part for the world economy and industry, that it's like a protection. So, but I also know that many of the companies are also worried because I think there was an FT article just out a few days ago about how a lot of companies are kind of reassessing the geopolitical risks of investment in Taiwan. So, how worried should these companies be? Should they really just be carefree and thinking, yeah, Taiwan is going to be safe and it's okay to keep on investing, or should we try to also look somewhere else? Don't we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. So from a company point of view, what do you think, Guanting? Guanting, you're muted. Yeah.
So as a Taiwanese, from my point of view, of course, we want them to put all the eggs in Taiwan so we can continue to keep our silicon shield. But yes, we do understand why those companies would like to, invest in other places in the world, and why some urge to move the supply chain back to their home countries to lower the risks, especially in this special time after the Ukraine war. Anything might happen, but again, the best way to prevent that from happening would be deterring that from happening. So, because of the economic interests of the companies around the world, they put their investment in Taiwan. But although the economics, the magazines say Taiwan is the dangerous place in the world, it is also the safest place in the world. I don't want to go to the details, but the low and the older, the institutions, the people here, they are living in a very safe society. The economy is very stable. The infrastructure is quite awesome compared to um, our competitors in the region. So in a way, I would not see Taiwan as a place that would have imminent threat at this very moment due to various reasons. So semiconductors, as I mentioned, played a crucial role to guard the region, to make people think twice, to make China think twice too, because they also import our chips, our semiconductor products. Um, and if there were attacks to Taiwan, this would definitely hurt the supply chain globally. And this would definitely hurt China as well, since China is also one of the most important trade partners of Taiwan. And I think industries or semiconductor play a very important role, but also we need to consider about geopolitics or global strategies. They are few choke points around the world. Taiwan Strait is one of them. So if you want to, like Japan, Korea, if China blockade Taiwan, the crude oils, all kind of resources could not be transported safely to the countries like Korea and Japan. And Japan is largest economy in the world. This would definitely hurt the global economy. So, in short, the industry, the economy, and also the geopolitical risk, all putting all this together, I think that could probably answer your questions. But yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Guanting. So, in short, we shouldn't be too worried because TSMC and it's the supply chain is really strong. Well, at least for now. So, we have a really interesting question coming up. I also like how the question is worded. So, can Taiwan unilaterally declare independence from China and therefore separate themselves? Or does this need agreement from China? So I would, Alice, please take this question, and maybe you could start by commenting on why we shouldn't phrase the question in this way.
Um, this is a very, I would say this is a very, maybe slightly, I don't know, it's very slightly sensitive issue. And the thing is, this is a complicated question. If I just answering from the angle from law, then yes, of course, a state can declare independence and separate themselves. But the problem is, if they really can separate themselves legally, this is where it is very difficult. And take the example of what's happening in Ukraine. In eastern Ukraine, there were two. They call themselves states, the Donetsk Republic. They call themselves state now. So if we follow this logic, then of course you can declare independence. But of course, the state that you were, the country that you were together, they will definitely protest. So it is very difficult actually for any states to do that. And probably a quite more recent example is Kosovo. But that's because of the atrocity happened in the former Yugoslavia and the Balkans, and there's a lot of historical and more complicated issues. So I would say that if Taiwan really wants to declare and also reply to another question, some comments before, the Republic of China is already a state and it's a sovereign state. The only problem is it's not accepted by the UN, and many countries have this one China policy. So that actually makes it a bit peculiar, because international law, there's this thing called secession and separatism. And so if really go deep into it, it's very complicated. So in short answer, legally, yes, of course can do that, but it will be a political disaster. That's why Taiwan really wants to seek more international support, because actually widespread recognition and especially recognition by the UN is very important. But as the current situation goes, it's not very easy. And something also really political incorrect. Maybe if some really bad thing happened to Taiwan, of course, I hope that will not happen, then we probably can get more international support. And then that will be a good chance for Taiwan to declare independence in the sense of what maybe people meant now. And of course, you don't really need agreement. You don't really need China to agree. But of course, if you really do that, it actually gives China a reason to attack Taiwan. So I don't think our leaders would do that anytime soon. So if this, I won't say this will not happen in the future, but there really needs to have a lot of things that is, you need to have like a lot of support and a lot of other things that have to be ready in hand. But because now, if we put into context of the current situation and also this Russian-Ukrainian conflict, I think to avoid war and to keep a friendly relationship is actually, and to have peace is what most people would like to have now.
Well, thank you so much, Alice. I think it's really important reminder that peace is really fragile, and sometimes war breaks out not because of something that appears intentional, but as a result of accidents. Yeah, as we often see. So we also have a one very interesting question, and it's related to how the West would respond in the case of conflict. So this is a question coming from Darren Jones. Considering Russia's new aggression in Europe, is the West likely to come to Taiwan's aid if a war really does break out? So I'm going to give this question to Nikki. So I know that Nikki is pretty active in the Taiwan studies area, and I realize there are plenty of Taiwan-related study programs. Really, more and more, I think I perceive that to be a good sign that more and more people are interested in Taiwan. So I will let Nikki answer the question, please.
Okay. So I think with this question, we need to kind of just again remind ourselves that that not all things are comparable, and we sometimes need to look at the things that are different. So one of the most important things about Taiwan, particularly in Taiwan-US relations, is that the Taiwan's Relations Act is an act of law in the United States. It's not a treaty. So United States has a defense treaty with Japan. That is a treaty. But the Taiwan's Relations Act is an act of law. And an important part of that law is the strategic ambiguity, which to some extent Biden kind of unveiled himself, as Guanin pointed to. And so the question really on, is the West likely to come to Taiwan's aid? I think really the answer to this should lie in that the answer to that should not necessarily be revealed. And maybe that's not really the kind of answer that you want, that actually the strategic ambiguity on the likelihood, and perhaps yes it would, i.e. the Taiwan's Relations Act does state that this is an American law, and then thus not coming to Taiwan's aid is in fact breaking law. I mean, or at least changing the status quo. So, i.e., if China invades Taiwan, that's the breaking of the status quo, right? And as such, would trigger those elements within the Taiwan's Relations Act. I think it's hard to turn around and say the West, i.e., would say European countries get involved in the likelihood of an invasion in Taiwan. I think what we have to ask ourselves is how strategically important is Taiwan to the West, right? And I would make the argument that actually, yes, it is strategically important. It's also strategically important regionally. And so I think we need to perhaps not necessarily look just to the West in its traditional sense, but perhaps saying, is Taiwan strategically important to Japan? What's the likelihood of Japan being involved if China was to invade Taiwan? And I would say that these are genuine questions, but I think the importance really here is this maintaining of this strategic ambiguity, this unknown, right? This strategic unknown is essentially the key defense for Taiwan at these particular kinds of times. Probably hasn't really quite answered the question, but I think, coming from more of a human, as I said, rather than an international relations perspective, that's probably the best way I can answer that question.
Well, thank you, Nikki. I agree with you that sometimes it's probably best to leave some things unsaid to keep a little bit of strategic ambiguity so that you won't have um, all your cards on the table yet for everybody to see. So I guess that could be a good strategy. So we are almost running out of time. But before we end this session, I would like to ask Guanting and Alice one last question. So what can we do to keep Taiwan safe in the future? I think that's something Nikki started the session by talking about how to future-proof Taiwan. So that's why I would like to hear your views as well. So if we may start with Guanting. So what do you think Taiwan should do if we want to keep Taiwan safe? Guanting, you're muted again. Sorry.
That's sorry about that. I think the key word again is deterrence. There are many ways to strengthen that idea, like to invest more on our own security, to strengthen our ties with the allies in the Indo-Pacific region, to promote multilateral relationship in Indo-Pacific region, which means we not only want to strengthen our security ties with the United States, but also important partners in the region, which might include India and Japan, of course, Australia as well. So it requires tremendous efforts because we are facing tremendous challenges, which is PRC, People's Republic of China. They are equipped with cutting-edge military assets. They have 3 aircraft carriers. They have nuclear weapons. And we just need to tell them that if they should decide to invade or take military actions to Taiwan, it will hurt them even more. So making them, helping them to frame a situation that they would have, they will have to think twice. So I also want to answer the questions earlier today. Some of the scholars asked the question: is Taiwan going to be like Ukraine? Will unsuccessful military actions in Ukraine actually stop China from even trying to invade Taiwan. These are all big if. At the very early stage of the war, Ukraine war, I was like, President Zelensky successfully stopped Russia's from, taking the capitals, and also earned the respects from the global leaders. Sanctions would work, and things would go smoothly after summer. But then again, Russia is almost taking all Donbass region, and the global leaders seems to have difficulties working together, and all the military equipments are still on the way to Ukraine. So it might also give China a wrong message that they could probably do the same thing, and they could probably succeed, and even with casualties, tremendous casualties, they might still succeed. So so this is a big if, and we really need to address these issues. I mean, in Ukraine as well, because China is watching carefully every single step. If we act soft on this, they will do similar things like Russia in the futures, and this might be the beginning of a great war. And at the time, all the partners in the global war have to be involved, and that will hurt everyone. This is something we don't want to see in the future. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Guanting. You just painted a very harrowing picture for us. So, well, well, Alice, what do you think? What can Taiwan do to, keep us safe?
Well, I think, of course, as I have addressed previously, I think to have international support is very important. Like Ukraine, they have a lot of international support. But since our situation is not really alike with Ukraine, I think it's probably best that we try to do things in a peaceful manner, like negotiation or other diplomatic ways to keep security and peace. And I think it's really important to have our interests aligned with other states. Um, Probably now, most important is still the United States, but I think Europe is also very important, and also now Asia Pacific. But I would also say maybe it's also important to have a better relation with China. We can, if we are interest aligned, they are less likely to do anything very aggressive towards Taiwan. So I think I personally hope that we can all be very peaceful with our neighbors, including China. And that will conclude my. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alice, for ending with a positive note. I really appreciated that. So, just to conclude all of your points, I think it's really important that all of us be aware of imminent threats and possible conflicts. Peace is really fragile, and we should strive to have good relations with our democratic partners or all partners, not just US, but Europe. Really, really happy to see that Taiwan seems to make more and more friends in Europe. So Lithuania, Czech Republic, and even France. So we were seeing more and more delegations coming to Taiwan or interested in dealing with Taiwan. This is really something that's unprecedented. So I really hope that the momentum continues and that Taiwan continues to thrive. But well, I'm biased because I'm from Taiwan. So I encourage the audience, if you're interested in learning more about Taiwan, you should seek out information from the think tank that Guanting is running, Taiwan Next Gen Foundation, and also the think tank, the defense think tank, the INDSR, Institute for National Defense and Security Research, as well as Nikki Alsford's Institute at University of Central Lancashire, and last but not least, the magazine that I'm affiliated with. It's called Commonwealth Magazine. We have an English website. It's unrelated with the British Commonwealth, by the way. I get that all the time, but it's called 天下 杂志if you're interested. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us today for this wonderful 1 hour discussion. It was really riveting and also sometimes maybe worrying, but it's nice to know that many people are caring about Taiwan, and I hope you do continue to pay attention to all things related to Taiwan. And also, thank you, the Open Forum, and our wonderful organizers of the event tonight. So, with that, I would like to conclude today's discussion and wish you a very good day or a good night wherever you are. So, thank you all, and bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a